A quiet suburban morning shattered by accusations that would expose the ugly face of prejudice lurking behind pristine picket fences. At first glance, this might seem like another story of missing belongings in a peaceful neighborhood, but what unfolded that Saturday afternoon revealed something far more troubling about the assumptions we make and the judgments we cast. 15-year-old Alex had been best friends with Chris since third grade. They were inseparable, spending countless hours playing video games, studying for tests, and hanging out at each other's houses. Their friendship never saw color. They were just two kids who shared a love for basketball and dreams of making it to the NBA someday. But everything changed when Alex's mother couldn't find her expensive sapphire necklace, a family heirloom passed down from her grandmother. Without a shred of evidence, she immediately pointed fingers at Chris, who had visited their home the previous day for a study session. Her only reasoning: Chris was the only outsider who had been in their house recently. The accusation spread through their tight-knit community like wildfire. Whispers turned into pointed stares. Parents who had previously welcomed Chris into their homes suddenly made excuses when their children wanted to hang out with him. The weight of unspoken prejudice hung heavy in the air, threatening to destroy not just a friendship, but the very fabric of trust that held their community together. Alex found himself torn between loyalty to his mother and standing up for his best friend. He knew Chris, knew his character, his values, and his dreams. The same Chris who volunteered at the local animal shelter every weekend, who helped elderly neighbors with their groceries, who had never taken so much as a pencil that wasn't his. As tension mounted and the accusations grew louder, Alex began his own investigation, determined to uncover the truth. What he discovered would not only challenge his mother's prejudices, but force their entire community to confront their own hidden biases. Security camera footage from their home revealed something unexpected, something that would turn this story of prejudice and false accusations completely on its head. The truth wasn't just shocking, it was a wake-up call. This isn't just a story about a missing necklace or wrongful accusations. It's about the moment a community was forced to look in the mirror and face their own prejudices. It's about a young man's courage to stand up for what's right, even when it meant challenging his own family. But before we reveal what really happened to that sapphire necklace, we need to understand how this incident affected everyone involved, how it tested friendships, strained family bonds, and ultimately led to an unexpected revelation that would change perspectives forever. As this story unfolds, you'll witness how quick judgments and baseless accusations can unravel years of friendship and trust in mere moments. You'll see how prejudice can poison even the most innocent situations, and how the courage to stand up for the truth can come from the most unexpected places. What Alex discovered on that security footage would shock everyone, including his mother, but more importantly, it would teach their community a valuable lesson about prejudice, truth, and the importance of looking beyond our biases to see people for who they really are. Stay tuned as we reveal the truth behind the missing necklace, and more importantly, the eye-opening journey that transformed a community's understanding of prejudice, friendship, and justice. Sometimes, the most powerful lessons come from the most uncomfortable situations, and this story is about to show us exactly why. The security footage revealed something that made Alex's stomach churn. The familiar silhouette moving through their dimly lit hallway late at night wasn't Chris at all. It was his own mother, wearing her bathrobe, pacing back and forth. She had been sleepwalking, something she'd struggled with for years, but had kept private out of embarrassment. The timestamp showed this happening just hours before she reported the necklace missing. But this discovery only deepened the mystery. If his mother had been sleepwalking, where was the necklace? Alex began piecing together more clues, remembering how their elderly cat, Shadow, had recently developed a habit of batting at shiny objects. A thorough search behind the living room bookcase, Shadow's favorite hiding spot, seemed like the next logical step. Meanwhile, the damage to Chris's reputation continued to spread. At school, once friendly faces turned cold. Their basketball coach even benched Chris during an important game, citing concerns from other parents. The injustice of it all ate away at Alex, but he needed concrete proof before he could clear his friend's name. The situation at home wasn't any better. Dinner conversations became tense affairs filled with uncomfortable silences. Alex's father, though skeptical of his wife's accusations, struggled to maintain peace in the household. "We need to be absolutely certain before we make such serious allegations," he'd say, only to be met with his wife's insistence that there was no other explanation. What made the situation even more complex was Chris's dignified response to the accusations. Instead of lashing out in anger, he maintained his composure, attending classes with his head held high despite the whispers and sideways glances. His parents, both respected professionals in the community, advised him to stay strong and let the truth speak for itself. The incident began affecting other families in unexpected ways. Parents started having difficult conversations with their children about prejudice and judgment. Some kids stood by Chris, creating a rift in the community between those who believed in his innocence and those who let suspicion cloud their judgment. Local social media groups buzzed with barely veiled references to the incident. What started as a missing necklace had evolved into a mirror reflecting the community's hidden biases. Some neighbors Alex had known his entire life revealed perspectives he'd never imagined they held, while others surprised him with their unwavering support for Chris. As Alex continued his investigation, he discovered something else on the security footage, a peculiar glint of light from the garden visible through the living room window. Could Shadow have somehow gotten outside with the necklace? The more he looked into it, the more he realized this mystery had layers he hadn't even considered. The weekend approached, marking 2 weeks since the necklace's disappearance. The annual community fair was coming up, an event where Chris and Alex had always volunteered together at the face-painting booth. This year, the organizers politely suggested that perhaps Chris should sit this one out. It was the last straw for Alex. Armed with new evidence and a growing understanding of how prejudice had poisoned his community, Alex knew he had to act. But proving his mother wrong meant potentially exposing her sleepwalking secret, something she'd kept hidden out of fear of judgment. That irony wasn't lost on him. The truth was tantalizingly close, yet still just out of reach. As Alex prepared to share his discoveries, he couldn't help but wonder, would exposing the truth heal their community, or would it create even deeper divisions? What he didn't know was that the biggest revelation was still to come, one that would challenge everything everyone thought they knew about this situation. The morning of the community fair arrived with an unexpected downpour, but the rain couldn't wash away the tension that had built up over the past weeks. Alex had spent the previous night compiling all his evidence, the security footage, photos of Shadow's hiding spots, and a detailed timeline of events. His hands trembled as he prepared to show his findings to his parents. But before he could, something extraordinary happened at the fair. Despite being uninvited, Chris showed up, not to volunteer, but to attend with his entire family. The crowd parted like water as they walked through, some people averting their eyes, others whispering behind their hands. Chris's younger sister clutched his hand tightly, confused by the cold reception they received. Alex's mother was helping at the bake sale booth when she saw them. Her face paled, and she nearly dropped the pie she was holding. That's when Shadow, who had somehow snuck into Alex's backpack and followed them to the fair, chose this moment to make a dramatic appearance. The elderly cat darted across the fairground, heading straight for the garden display. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. As people gathered to watch the commotion, Shadow leaped onto one of the garden gnomes, batting at something that caught the morning light. Alex's heart raced as he pushed through the crowd, following his cat. His mother was right behind him, along with what felt like half the community. The garden display had been set up by Mrs. Chen, their neighborhood's most passionate gardener. She had transported her prized gnome collection from her own garden for the fair. As Alex approached, he noticed something unusual about one particular gnome. It wasn't just decorated with ordinary garden ornaments. His mother gasped audibly. There, tangled in the gnome's fishing line decoration, was her sapphire necklace, glinting in the sunlight that had just broken through the clouds. But how did it get there? The answer lay in the security footage Alex had discovered, but there was more to the story than even he had pieced together. Mrs. Chen stepped forward, her face a mix of confusion and recognition. "That's strange," she said. "I could have sworn I saw." But before she could finish her sentence, another voice cut through the crowd. It was Alex's mother's voice, but different somehow, filled with a dawning realization and horror. The community stood frozen, watching the scene unfold. Chris and his family had made their way to the front of the crowd. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Alex's father placed a supportive hand on his son's shoulder, nodding encouragingly. This was the moment. The truth was about to come out. But the truth wasn't what anyone expected. As Alex pulled out his phone to show the security footage, his mother's face went through a range of emotions: confusion, shock, and finally, devastating understanding. The sleepwalking incident was just the tip of the iceberg. What the footage revealed about the necklace's journey would force everyone to confront their prejudices in ways they never imagined. Standing there in the middle of the fair, surrounded by neighbors who had let bias cloud their judgment, Alex realized that this moment would either tear their community apart or become the catalyst for real change. The truth he was about to reveal would do more than just clear Chris's name. It would hold a mirror up to everyone present, reflecting back their own prejudices and assumptions. As Alex opened his mouth to speak, a sudden gust of wind rustled through the fair, scattering papers and knocking over empty cups. It felt like even nature was holding its breath, waiting for the truth to finally come out. What happened next would change their community forever. Alex's phone screen illuminated with the security footage, casting a blue glow on the faces gathered around him. The video showed his mother sleepwalking, yes, but there was something else, something no one had noticed before. In the background, through the living room window, another figure was visible in their garden. It was Mrs. Chen, working late in her own yard as she often did, and the timestamp showed it was the exact night the necklace went missing. "I remember that night," Mrs. Chen spoke up, her voice trembling. "I saw your mother in her robe, walking through your garden. I thought she was admiring her flowers. I had no idea she was sleepwalking. She was carrying something shiny, but I assumed it was just her gardening tools in the moonlight." Alex's mother covered her mouth in shock as fragments of memories started flooding back. Her sleepwalking episodes had been getting worse due to stress at work, but she'd been too embarrassed to tell anyone. The community watched in stunned silence as she stepped forward, tears welling in her eyes. But before she could speak, another revelation stopped everyone in their tracks. Mr. Thompson, their next-door neighbor, pushed through the crowd with his home security camera footage pulled up on his tablet. "There's more," he said gravely. "My cameras caught something else that night, something that changes everything." The new footage showed Shadow, their cat, following Alex's sleepwalking mother into the garden, as she unconsciously placed the necklace on one of her rose bushes, a habit from her younger days of hanging jewelry on her jewelry tree. Shadow playfully batted at it, but what happened next left everyone gasping. The necklace didn't just fall into Mrs. Chen's yard, it was carried there. By this point, Chris had moved closer to Alex, their shoulders almost touching. The crowd's attention shifted between the footage, Alex's mother, and Mrs. Chen's garden gnomes. The truth was unraveling in a way no one had anticipated, revealing how a series of innocent coincidences had been twisted by prejudice into something ugly and harmful. Alex's mother started to sway slightly, overwhelmed by the revelations. The weight of her accusations, her unacknowledged sleepwalking, and the damage she'd caused to Chris and his family seemed to crash down on her all at once. But there was still one piece of the puzzle missing, one final twist that would explain how the necklace ended up entwined in Mrs. Chen's garden gnome's fishing line. As if on cue, Shadow slinked forward and rubbed against Mrs. Chen's ankles, purring loudly. Mrs. Chen's eyes widened with recognition. "The neighborhood cats," she whispered, then louder. "The neighborhood cats. They've been playing in my garden at night. I've seen them batting around small objects, but I thought they were just playing with the decorations." The crowd murmured as the pieces started falling into place. But just as understanding began to dawn, Alex noticed something in the corner of Mr. Thompson's video that made his blood run cold. There was another figure in the background that night, someone who had witnessed everything and said nothing for weeks. Someone whose silence had allowed this situation to spiral out of control. The truth about this silent witness would reveal not just how the necklace found its way to the garden gnome, but expose an even deeper layer of prejudice within their community. As Alex zoomed in on this section of the footage, he realized that clearing Chris's name was just the beginning. The real story, the one that would truly transform their community, was about to unfold. The rain had stopped completely now, and an eerie silence fell over the crowd. In this moment of clarity, standing among garden gnomes and long-held prejudices, Alex understood that the next few minutes would either heal their community or break it apart entirely. The evidence he was about to share would force everyone to confront not just their assumptions about Chris, but their own role in allowing discrimination to flourish in their supposedly inclusive neighborhood. The silent witness in Mr. Thompson's footage turned out to be none other than Mrs. Peterson, the head of the neighborhood watch and the same person who had led the Whisper campaign against Chris. The video clearly showed her watching Alexa's sleepwalking mother that night, seeing Shadow playing with the necklace, and even observing as the neighborhood cats eventually carried it into Mrs. Chen's garden. "I saw everything," Mrs. Peterson finally admitted, her voice cracking. "I saw your mother sleepwalking, and I saw what really happened to the necklace. But when the accusations started flying," she paused, tears welling up, "I convinced myself that staying quiet was easier than speaking up. I was wrong. I was so terribly wrong." The crowd fell silent as Mrs. Peterson continued, revealing how she had actually found the necklace in Mrs. Chen's garden days ago, but said nothing, allowing the suspicion toward Chris to grow. Her admission sparked a wave of painful self-reflection throughout the community. Parents who had pulled their children away from Chris, neighbors who had spread rumors, and friends who had turned their backs, all were forced to confront their own roles in perpetuating prejudice. Alex's mother stepped forward, her hands shaking. The weight of her actions, compounded by the revelation of her sleepwalking and Mrs. Peterson's silence, overwhelmed her. But instead of making excuses, she turned to Chris and his family. "I am so deeply sorry," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "My prejudice hurt you, and no apology can undo that damage. But I hope you'll give me the chance to make things right." What happened next surprised everyone. Chris, who had every right to be angry, stepped forward with dignity and grace. "What hurt the most wasn't the accusation," he said quietly. "It was watching how quickly people chose to believe it. But right now, I see people willing to acknowledge their mistakes and change. That's what matters most." But the story wasn't over. As the community began to process these revelations, Shadow darted forward again, this time pawing at Mrs. Peterson's large tote bag. Inside was a collection of missing items she'd found around the neighborhood over the years, items she'd kept quiet about while allowing suspicion to fall on others. The discovery sparked a deeper conversation about how prejudice had been quietly shaping their community's dynamics for years. Alex's father, who had remained quietly supportive throughout the ordeal, finally spoke up. "We can't change the past," he said, looking around at his neighbors, "but we can learn from it. This isn't just about a missing necklace anymore. It's about who we want to be as a community." The fair, which had started in tension, transformed into a moment of genuine community healing. Mrs. Chen offered her garden as a space for regular neighborhood gatherings. The basketball coach publicly apologized to Chris and reinstated him on the team. Even the most skeptical neighbors began to reach out, acknowledging their biases and committing to do better. As the day drew to a close, Alex watched his mother and Chris's family sharing coffee at Mrs. Chen's booth, while Shadow contentedly dozed nearby, still wearing the now famous sapphire necklace as a makeshift collar, his mother's idea of making light of the situation. The sight of his best friend's genuine smile returning was worth every difficult moment of the past weeks. But perhaps the most powerful moment came when Mrs. Peterson, inspired by the day's events, announced the creation of a community dialogue program, with Chris and Alex as its first youth leaders. The program would address prejudice and bias head-on, turning their painful experience into an opportunity for lasting change. As Alex looked around at his transformed community, he realized that sometimes the most powerful changes come from confronting our worst moments with honesty and courage. The missing necklace had uncovered something far more valuable in sapphires. It had revealed the true character of their community and its capacity for growth, understanding, and redemption. In the weeks that followed, the community's transformation was remarkable. The garden where the necklace had been found became a symbol of change, with Mrs. Chen hosting weekly gatherings she called Growth and Grace, combining her love for gardening with open discussions about inclusion and understanding. Her garden gnomes, once the center of controversy, now wore small handcrafted friendship bracelets made by neighborhood children. Alex and Chris's friendship emerged stronger than ever. Their basketball team, inspired by Chris's graceful handling of the situation, adopted a new motto: stand together, play together. The coach incorporated team-building exercises that went beyond the court, helping players understand and appreciate their diverse backgrounds. Mrs. Peterson's community dialogue program, now named Bridge Builders, became a model for other neighborhoods. She worked closely with Chris's parents, who brought their professional expertise in education and social work to help shape the program. The initiative didn't shy away from uncomfortable conversations, but approached them with honesty and compassion. Alex's mother channeled her remorse into action. She openly shared her story of how unconscious bias had led her to hurt innocent people, and how her fear of addressing her sleepwalking had contributed to the situation. Her vulnerability inspired others to examine their own biases and seek help for issues they'd been hiding out of shame. Shadow, the unexpected hero of the story, became a neighborhood celebrity of sorts. The elderly cat's adventurous spirit had unknowingly exposed prejudices that needed addressing. Alexa's mother finally got him a proper collar, retiring the sapphire necklace to its rightful place in her jewelry box, though she often joked that it looked better on Shadow anyway. The annual community fair was transformed too. Instead of being just another social gathering, it became a celebration of diversity and understanding. The face-painting booth, where Chris and Alex had once been separated by prejudice, became the most popular attraction, with kids requesting designs that represented unity and friendship. Mr. Thompson used his security system for a new purpose, creating a neighborhood watch program that focused on bringing people together rather than driving them apart. His cameras captured moments of kindness and community spirit, which he shared during monthly meetings, replacing fear and suspicion with trust and connection. But perhaps the most profound change was visible in the small, everyday moments. Children who had once been told to avoid certain neighbors now played freely together. Front porches that had been empty became gathering spaces for conversation. The community began to resemble what it had always claimed to be, a place where everyone belonged. One evening, as Alex and Chris sat on Alex's front porch steps sharing stories about basketball practice, Alex's mother brought out cookies and joined them. The moment was simple but significant, a reminder of how far they'd come and how much stronger they were together. Shadow wandered over and settled between them, purring contentedly. Looking back, the missing necklace had revealed something far more valuable than any piece of jewelry. It had shown them the true meaning of community. Through confronting their biases, acknowledging their mistakes, and choosing to grow together, they had built something more precious than gold or sapphires: genuine understanding and connection. As the sun set on another day in their transformed neighborhood, the lessons learned remained clear. True character isn't revealed in moments of comfort, but in how we handle challenges and correct our mistakes. The story of the missing necklace would be told for years to come, not as a tale of accusation and prejudice, but as a reminder that change is always possible when people choose to open their hearts and minds to the truth. Sometimes it takes a lost necklace, a sleepwalking mother, a faithful friend, and an adventurous cat to teach us our most important lessons about justice, friendship, and the power of standing up for what's right.